This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
Republican Governor Joe Lombardo vetoed a record 87 bills passed by the 2025 legislature. Along with his 75 vetoes in 2023, he's now the governor who has killed the most legislation in our state's history. Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we speak with Jacob Solis. He's the press secretary for the advocacy group Battleborn Progress. Now, obviously, they're not happy with much of the Democratic agenda getting derailed with a stroke of a pen. Actually, 87 strokes. But we asked Jacob, are you being sore losers here? Or objectively, has Lombardo gone too far with his vetoes this year? It's Monday, July 21st. I'm David Figler, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Jacob, a lot of eyes have been rolled at the sheer number of Governor Lombardo vetoes. Is there a broad theme to what got shot down by him?
Not necessarily. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 buckets of stuff that got vetoed. I think the big one is maybe sort of like, we'll call it hot button culture war stuff that was just sort of never going to make it past the finish line. So I think of things like the Democrats tried to ban book bans, for instance, to make it much more difficult for parents or schools to get rid of books in school libraries. Lombardo vetoed that. I think we can all sort of understand why. Doesn't take a genius. Some stuff is like strange tactical decisions that take a lot of unpacking. I think of the voter ID veto. Lombardo obviously wants voter ID. Democrats proposed it at the 11th hour. He vetoed it. That one is what's the word I'm looking for? A Gordian knot that, no one is willing to slice. So that's a weird one. And then the third bucket is days and month, like special designations. And Lombardo just vetoed a bunch of those. So some padding of the stats here for like the total number. But yeah, those would be the buckets, I'd say.
And I'm wondering if bucket 3 and bucket 2 are kind of connected buckets, because I think a lot of the days that were being honored are for like indigenous people or, marginalized communities, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I guess if there's connective tissue between all of these things, there is this sort of running through line of all politics is somehow culture war politics now, right? There's sort of no getting away from it. And so, I think you can see it as an extension of that. I think frequently Lombardo in his veto messages would say, oh, this should have been a proclamation through the governor's office, or there's methods to make this a proclamation at the local level. There's no need to make this legislation. But certainly by saying this doesn't need to be legislation, that's making a statement of the thing itself, right? Making that veto tells us a lot.
I am curious, though, especially with the Gordian knot ones, which is a very, some I could easily place, like the rejection of the opt-out of sex ed. That's obviously a culture issue. But I'm wondering how many of the vetoes were on bills that had at least some like significant Republican support.
Yeah, and it's a good question. I think we can expand this, I think, to even include stuff that was not necessarily vetoes. I think of there was a bill that was shot down that would have limited the corporate purchasing of homes in Nevada. And very clearly, Ira Hansen, Republican senator who blew it all up at the end of the legislative session, if anyone remembers, he stands up and says, I love this legislation, but the governor's office told us to vote it down, so we're voting it down.
Whoa, he said that out loud.
Yeah. He said that like during the floor debate, but he was like, this should come back. We should do this again. By the way, it never came back. It never got added back into the housing bill that did eventually pass. So just in case anyone was wondering. So that's like a we'll not call it a quasi veto, but it kind of is, because I believe it needed a 2/3 vote to pass. So
some votes need 2/3 because of tax implications or other rules of order.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I do wonder, did he kill any what you would consider to be mostly bipartisan bills, or was it just solely a bloodbath to the Dems and their bills?
It was I don't know that I would call it bipartisan per se, because, I think there were plenty of Democrats who were unhappy with the way that the voter ID bill materialized. I think it was one of those bills that made everyone upset because the Republicans didn't like that it created ballot drop boxes for early voting, or for the period, in between early voting and the election. And then obviously Democrats are like, well, why does this have voter ID, right? We haven't actually voted. We voted on voter ID once in 2024. We're going to vote on it again in 2026. Why are we doing it in 2025? What's even the point? So that one made everyone upset. And so that got vetoed. And everyone, I think, still remains a little mystified.
But in your knowledge, most of the bills that were vetoed didn't have any real significant Republican support from the onset.
No, not tremendously. But it's difficult to entangle because, to some extent, there are not many Republicans who break rank because the governor is the leader of the party, right? We saw this when Sisolak was in charge of the Democratic legislatures back in 2020 and 2018, or 2019 and 2021, I should say. But, if the governor's office tells the Republican caucus, hey, this is the caucus position on this bill, then there is no Republican support. So
I see. So whether they want to or not, they might not go on the record voting for it.
Right. And certainly there are bills. I don't think the governor, who knows what the governor would have done with, say, film tax credits. That never made it across the finish line. So we'll never know. It's a hypothetical. But there was Republican opposition to that, too, and Democratic opposition. I'll just say blankly, Battleborn Progress was against film tax credits. But I know we were, whenever the Nevada Public Research Institute, NPRI, very conservative, but we would call in an opposition. They would call in an opposition. It felt like the Predator meme,
Yeah.
When they clasp arms together and the camera zooms in on the clasped arms, it's they're joining forces.
Yes.
I don't know. It's always a surprise to see who else is sitting on my side of the aisle sometimes.
Yes. Oh, you bedfellows. So here's something I'm kind of curious about, Jacob. We look at all these vetoes and, like I said, eyes roll. But are we just passing more legislation overall? So proportionally, are his vetoes not quite so out of place?
I think there's two ways to look at this, and one is looking at modern history in the last 20 years, and one is looking at everything that came before. So in the last 20 years, the best comparison is Brian Sandoval, because obviously that was the closest, not including Steve Sisolak, to right now as a Republican governor with frequently Democrat-controlled legislatures. And so in 2017, Sandoval sets the then record for the most vetoes in a single session at 41. That is less than half of what Lombardo vetoed this session, just for comparison.
But what I'm asking is, are there more bills that are passed in the Lombardo era than in the Sandoval era, say?
And to answer that question very specifically, I looked this up. In that session, 2017, Sandoval signed 608 of 649 bills. Lombardo signed 518 bills out of 605. So there are actually fewer bills passed and signed this year than in 2017 when the previous record was set.
Jacob, I want to ask you about the specific of some of the bills, or at least categories of bills that were vetoed within these buckets that you mentioned. Progressive organizations like yours were really upset about which bills in particular that got the veto.
I think if we're looking at two bills that we were tracking very closely and were very excited about, I think paid family leave was a huge one. So the United States is one of 6 countries in the entire world that doesn't have any kind of national mandate for paid family leave. There's only something like less than 24 states that actually have some kind of mandate. And so Nevada has paid family leave for public sector workers, and they were trying to expand it to private sector workers. That got through. Lombardo vetoes it. So that's just disappointing. But then other than that, I think also sort of on the family issues, I think the right to IVF bill getting vetoed. That's another sort of culture war sticking point. We saw right at the very end of the session, Catholic groups coming really hard on Lombardo to veto that measure, and he did veto it. And I think after we saw what happened in Alabama last year, where that state Supreme Court I believe, said that IVF was unconstitutional there, something or thereabouts, under their anti-abortion law. I think there was some expectation that IVF was some kind of third rail for Republicans, that they would have to become pro-IVF. And I think that surprised folks that, something that was relatively uncontroversial here in Nevada. I think IVF is fairly popular. Lombardo still vetoed it.
Does he have to give reasons why he vetoes things, or does he just do it as kind of a nicety that has become tradition?
Yes, you know what? That's a good question if it's like a legal requirement. I know that he does, right? So his office will put out a veto statement with every single veto that he makes. How elaborate that veto statement is, I mean, varies widely from bill to bill, and he can say whatever he wants, you know? And with IVF in particular, he said it was a cost thing because of what would incur a cost on Medicaid. But the problem is, it's like, here's the problem with veto statements, is like the governor can say one thing, but it is like a falsifiable statement. So in this case, he said that the state can't afford an insurer mandate on Medicaid. But certainly there are ways for the state to engineer the law such that the insurer mandate on Medicaid is not a sort of long-term burden for IVF. So it's one of those things where he can say whatever he wants in the veto mandate, but it doesn't need to be the end of the argument. Unfortunately, because he's the governor, it is the end of the argument.
You know how sometimes you just want to try something new, something local, special, maybe even a little inspiring? Well, that's Crush Pad Wine Bar. Crush Pad, it's a locally owned, award-winning wine bar created by a husband and wife team, both certified wine pros who believe wine should be fun, welcoming, and never pretentious. And on Saturday, July 26th, they're hosting their biggest event yet, the Grand Wine Tasting. It's going to be a beautiful evening of more than 25 wines poured by local wine experts. You get a grazing table, charcuterie, a take-home artisan goblet, live music, and it's all for a great cause, supporting the Nevada Ballet Theater. Tickets are $150, or you could go VIP for rare wines and early access at 6 p.m. Space is limited, so grab your tickets now at crushpadwinebar.com. That's crushpadwinebar.com. And hey, there's going to be a lot of wine involved, so be safe and consider taking a rideshare. Again, that's crushpadwinebar.com. Go check it out. Hey, Las Vegas, ever look for a sign of what to do? Well, here's one, literally. The Neon Museum is offering a limited-time deal just for Nevada residents. 50% off admission to one of the most iconic must-see spots in the city. That's right, half off to explore Vegas history through the glow of vintage neon signs. Just swing by the box office, show your Nevada ID, and you're in. No promo codes, no online hoops to jump through, just a classic local appreciation deal. Make it a night with friends, bring visiting family, or finally check it off your Vegas bucket list. Visit the Neon Museum and let the lights of old Vegas shine for you. Now, this dazzling deal won't last forever, so grab your tickets now and experience the glow before it's gone. Again, to apply the discount, just bring your Nevada State ID card to the Neon Museum and purchase your ticket at the door. To learn more, visit neonmuseum.org. One ticket per valid ID.
This episode of CityCast is sponsored by Babbel. Learning a new language opens the door to new friends, new cultures, maybe even a whole new life. So why not start that journey today? You can start speaking a new language with confidence thanks to Babbel's conversation-based technique that quickly teaches you useful words and phrases about the things you actually talk about in the real world. I'm CityCast CEO David Plotz, and I've been learning Spanish with Babbel. Just one of the 12 languages you can learn with it, including Dutch, French, Italian, which is going to be next for me, Turkish, and Russian. I love the interactive dialogues that Babbel has, which allow me to practice what I've learned right away, and also the speech recognition function, which makes sure I'm getting the pronunciation just right, which honestly, usually I'm not. Also, I love that Babbel's lessons always cover actual things that I talk about in the real world, like food, talking to people I've just met, and also food. Staying motivated to learn a new language has never been easier thanks to real-time feedback, progress trackers, and handy visualizations. In only 10 to 15 minutes a day on Babbel's mobile app or website. So get talking with Babbel. I want you to learn another language, so I'm teaming up with Babbel to gift you 55% off subscriptions, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/citycast. Get up to 55% off at babbel.com/citycast. Spelled BABBEL.com/citycast. Babbel.com/citycast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
I mean, theoretically, the governor's veto power is part of our system of checks and balances. But, as we're seeing here, one person can literally undo months of hearings and compromises, et cetera, that result in a bill that ostensibly is designed to do good or solve problems in our state. Are there any discussions anywhere about limiting such, and I'm just going to say it, king-sized power? Should there be some kind of check to the check? Is there any kind of check to the check?
It's a good question. And I think at this point, it's something that I think would depend on whether or not, say, the opposition party thinks that they're going to win a governor election in the future and they're going to lose legislative elections, right? Because everyone wants to have the king power. They would love to have the veto power, say, and if the opposite were true, right? A Republican legislature were trying to do culture war priorities and they want a Democratic governor to be able to stop that. They want to maintain that power. But I think a bigger question is the sort of death or the inability of legislatures as a rule to use veto overrides, that because partisan entrenchment is so solid and so immovable that, I mean, even historically, it doesn't really happen. Just for context, the record for veto overrides before Jim Gibbons in 2009, I think, was three vetoes overridden in the next session by the legislature.
And just quickly, that's the process where in the next legislative session, the party
two-thirds of the legislature votes to override the veto. Yeah, but it has to be at the next legislative session.
Okay. And that's what people were talking about when they said Dems are getting close to a supermajority, meaning they would have that ability to override, but they don't.
Exactly. They do not. Yeah, they're just a seat or two short in either house. But I mean, even historically, it's so rare. The only time it happened in any kind of bulk number was when Jim Gibbons was governor. Democrats overrode, I think, 25 of his vetoes out of it was like half of his vetoes. It was truly a mind-boggling amount. It has never happened since. It will never happen again, probably. It was very specific to how unpopular Jim Gibbons was.
He was a very unpopular.
Yeah, extraordinarily. Yeah.
Governor. I mean, how does this impact Lombardo? I guess I'm curious. What does Lombardo get out of so many, like setting the record twice and then a third time with collectively?
I think that's a genuine question because when say Brian Sandoval sets the record, first, he's a popular governor who's like a popular moderate. I think his approval rating was the entire time he was governor was like north of 70%. It was truly unheard of. And so he sets that record when he's term limited and going out the door.
Yeah.
There is no precedent for a governor vetoing this many bills. You have to go back to pre-World War II to see it happen with any sort of regularity. And so I don't think we know if this will even be a liability for Lombardo, if people will see this as a Lombardo being like a champion against quote unquote excesses from the left, or as a sort of, bulwark against progress, right? That he's stopping these things from happening. Because I mean, frankly, that's what we think, right? Because if you look at the bills he's vetoed, be it paid family leave, be it IVF, right? These are common sense things that people support. Why not sign them? And he's cited again with sort of corporations in these cases. And I think we see that as a through line with all the bills he signs too.
I guess it really depends on the strategy that whoever is his opponent in the next election, whether it be a primary or in the general election, makes of the stuff. I mean, like you said, look, and I don't want to get partisan about it, but there did seem to be some, big issues in our community, like people dying of heat. And I know that there were some like tenant protections, et cetera, because a lot of people die because they have bad landlords who aren't fixing their air conditioner and stuff like that. Things that would have made like absolute perfect sense to save lives, and they got the veto. Do you think that any possible opponent to Governor Lombardo will be able to convince the people of Las Vegas, or the state rather, that some of these bills were just so important and it was so cruel or unnecessary to veto them?
Oh, I think absolutely. Some of the vetoes feel like cruel on the face of them. I think the free school breakfast and lunch one always feels sort of outrageous when you say it, like just tearing away school lunches from kids feels a little excessive.
But in fairness, there are arguments against universal school lunches. We've had that topic on this very podcast where,
for sure,
like you are giving lunches to kids who don't need it, but you're trying to ferret out. I mean, I get it. I might very well have a very personal opinion, but just in the nature of our conversation, I get it. But yeah, I also hear what you're saying.
Yeah, but to your earlier question, I think housing might be one really big thing, because if you look at what he's actually accomplished on housing, it's all sort of very supply supply side focused. He's really laser focused on trying to get federal land released, although that didn't happen. And so who knows where that's going to go. But even if you do get federal land release, when are those things going to get built? How quick does the permitting process actually go? And he's moved the goalposts and stopped saying affordable housing and started calling it attainable housing, because they raised the threshold for affordability to 150% of the median income. So now instead of say like $65,000 or $70,000 in annual income, we're talking over $100,000 in annual income for benefiting from these programs. And so it's like, it's evocative, I think, of what he tried to do with opportunity scholarships, was make it so that parents with incomes north of $100,000 a year could benefit from government money for private schools. Now we're letting middle class, upper middle class families start to benefit from government programs that might once have been geared toward helping the lowest income Nevadans who are struggling the most to find housing. Because, by the way, this bill is simply not going to solve a housing crisis, especially not when tariffs are raising prices of lumber and the skilled labor for construction is shrinking. So I fail to see how any of his policies are actually going to solve this problem.
Yeah, I saw a lot of the responses of why he's vetoing things, and they really were kind of like generic free market and let it take care of it. But again, these issues are still facing our state, the bottom of the barrel in all, as they say, the good lists, with regard to housing and education and medical care, et cetera. But, there is an argument that I've heard, Jacob, that the Dems kind of set Lombardo up in a way. Like, they put up quite a few bills that they knew he would reject, so they could use it in those future campaigns against him. In other words, theater. I mean, that's fair too, right?
Look, I think to some extent, when the legislative session is happening, all of these things are pieces on the board. There are things to be traded so that everyone can get what they want in some way or another. And I think the question here was, did the Lombardo side negotiate with the skill required to get their priorities through? And the answer is no. So I think to some extent, because we saw his bills die at the very end of the session, they were coming in right at, these huge amendments, like 800-page amendments being dropped with hours to go. That is indicative of a negotiating process that is not going well. And so if one side no longer has anything to trade, then the other side, in this case, the legislative Democrats, can absolutely push through whatever they want because they control the votes they have to pass bills, right? So is it possible that some of that stuff they can use against Lombardo now? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. They're going to. Was that necessarily the thought process when that bill was introduced, at the beginning of the legislative session? Maybe, but it's also entirely possible that was simply part of the puzzle, right? That it's a policy they liked and it's a policy they want. And it was a policy they hoped to get across the finish line. And then it became increasingly clear that it wasn't going to happen.
But, things like repealing summary eviction, which is, Nevada is the only place that puts the onus on the tenant to stop the eviction process, basically, and not, or to initiate any legal proceedings. There was never any chance that was going to pass. And yet they pushed that one over the finish line. So to a degree, I could probably come up with maybe a dozen of those type of bills that never had a chance. So aren't the Dems as much to blame for the vetoes as the veto king himself?
I mean, yeah, you could always make that argument. It's look what you made me do. But if I think if Lombardo was being an effective governor too, he did this occasionally, but not very frequently, frankly. He would say outright that some bill was going through the legislature and he would say it was bad and that he was going to veto it. But I think he maybe did that a handful of times. If he really wanted to make his public stance known, he would have done it.
Is there a chance for cooperation between the governor and the legislature in the interim that could start to address some of these problems that his last session left unresolved? I mean, housing, Medicare, medical care, inflation, all the stuff.
It's a genuine question. And I think a lot of it depends on what the federal situation is. I think right now the expectation is that Nevada's Medicaid will fare maybe slightly better than initial expectations, but we're still talking about, potentially tens of millions of dollars of impact, thousands and thousands of people who might lose their health insurance. And so it's like, what is the state going to do with that? Will there need to be a special session to take care of that? Does Lombardo try and do, say, if he calls a special session to handle the budget, does he also try and do crime or whatever,
How many topics can he do in a special session?
They're not topic limited. So I remember, I believe the 2021 during COVID had like 4 major bills, obviously all of them COVID related, but technically sort of very different from each other. Versus I think the stadium ones stick in the mind, obviously the Raiders stadium in 2016.
As a one-off. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It was two bills in that one. A's stadium was the one bill. But then once you have the one bill, you can stick whatever you want in it. So remember, to the A's stadium, they stuck a bunch of different provisions about like prevailing wage and stuff just to force Lombardo to sign bills that he had vetoed like a week before.
Oh, weird. So some of these things that got vetoed might come back if he opens up a special session, and that's Governor Lombardo's choice. If he says special session, it happens. If he doesn't want one, it doesn't happen?
Absolutely. That's how it goes. So, and he has to be the one to call the special session.
That brings up an interesting point to me, and I think this will be the last thing that we talk about, Jacob, because it is so interesting that if there is a special session, it's kind of like extended innings for the legislature to, possibly get some stuff done or some stuff signed. But we've already heard that a lot of these legislators who were very active, including the leadership, might not be around for the 2027 session. So they're kind of lame ducking themselves. I know the Senate Majority Leader, Nicole Cannizzaro, has already said, I'm, not coming back. I'm going to try to be the Attorney General. How does that shape the conversations or even the special sessions when so many of these legislators have said in one way or another that they're not going to even be involved in the next legislative session?
Well, I think it sharpens the political divisions, right? So I think one of the reasons, I'll make this example. So Nevada is one of only a couple states that doesn't have a legislative session every year. Texas is another one. In Texas, frequently what happens is they will call special sessions like all the time just to deal with random stuff. It's happening right now. They're calling a special session to deal with the flooding there. And frequently they'll just, throw a grab bag of different policies in there. But Texas is a mono-party state. So all Republicans, they control the agenda. And so they can sort of do whatever they want with these special sessions. In divided government in Nevada, much more difficult to call special sessions for those reasons. And the closer you get to an election, the harder it is to justify doing a legislative session where you might have to pass something or vote on something that makes you less likely to win your election that year. And I think both Lombardo and, to your point, Cannizzaro, or any legislative leader who's running either for the legislature again or for some other position, are all going to be thinking about that. And that pressure gets sharper the closer you get to November 2026. So I think the question becomes different. Is there a special session this fall? Is different from, is there a special session this winter or next spring? And what is the special session for? I think to maybe when Kenny Gwynn was governor in the early 2000s, they had that special session over the insurance crisis, right? Like health insurers leaving Nevada. That was like a very specific economic crisis that needed to be solved right then and there.
Right.
Is something like that going to happen? We don't know. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. So that kind of special session, I think everyone, keeps everyone awake at night. They would rather not have to deal with that ever, given the circumstances.
Yeah, especially if they're in heated political contests. Anything that they could say may not be about their constituents or what's best for the state, but what's best for their election. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, boy. Jacob Solis, I want to thank you for joining us today on CityCast Las Vegas.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, go tell a friend. You could also rate our show with the little stars that are there where you listen to this. You could leave us a review there too. And subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Till then, stay lucky.